He stood across from me in the kitchen, arms crossed, voice flat. "Stop pretending you did something great." I didn't argue. I just stood there. Eleanor Langley, 61, retired invisible in my own home. But 2 weeks later, his face went pale when CNN aired my photo beside the headline, "The Forgotten Commander Behind the Largest Civilian Rescue in Modern Military History." If you've ever been dismissed by your own child, if you've ever buried a truth so deep it started to feel like a dream, this story is for you. I'm Eleanor, and for years they told me I was just a clerk. Stay with me, because what started in silence ended with the world finally calling me what I was all along, a war hero. The last time my son looked me in the eyes, it was over roast chicken and white wine. He'd invited me to his new house for my 62nd birthday. A modest dinner, he said. Just him, his wife, and little Max. I told myself not to expect much. I'd long stopped expecting anything from family. There was no cake, no candles, not even a happy birthday, Mom. Just a linen napkin folded neatly beside my plate and a faint scent of lemon cleaner in the air. His wife Madison brought out the food like it was a formality, not a celebration. She smiled politely but never asked how I was. Max was on his tablet in the corner. The boy barely looked up. Darren poured himself a glass of wine, then one for her. None for me. "Dr. Carlson says you shouldn't mix with your blood pressure meds," he explained without meeting my eyes. I hadn't said a word about my blood pressure. Dinner went as most things do in that house. Structured, distant, performative. Darren spoke mostly about Madison's recent promotion and Max's school projects. He used words like legacy and trajectory as if he were giving a presentation, not talking to his mother. At one point, Madison touched his arm lightly and said, "It's just so nice that your parents raised you to value discipline. It really shows." I almost smiled at that. Almost. Then Darren leaned back in his chair, fork still in hand, and said, "You know, Mom, sometimes I think you enjoy pretending you did something great. But we all know you just typed up memos in some army base." He said it so casually. No venom, no raised voice. Just matter of fact. Like the truth had been quietly known all along, and I was the only one still playing a role. I looked at him then. Really looked. This was the boy I'd held against my chest during storm drills, the one I'd left love notes for in his lunchbox. The one I'd kept safe by never saying a word about what I really did. About the nights I went radio silent about the names I couldn't tell him, the places I couldn't admit to going. I didn't do it for glory. I did it so he could grow up thinking I was boring and harmless. Well, I'd succeeded. I didn't respond. Just folded my napkin and rested it gently on the edge of the table. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice even. Madison blinked, surprised. "Oh, you're leaving already?" "It's getting late," I said. "Darren didn't walk me to the door. Max didn't say goodbye." And as I stepped into the quiet of the night, I realized something strange. I wasn't hurt. Not exactly, not anymore. What I felt was emptiness. The kind that settles into the spaces where memory used to live. I drove home in silence. No radio, no thoughts. Just the rhythm of the tires over the pavement and the slow ache behind my ribs. My apartment was cold when I entered, not because of the temperature, but because nothing in it ever moved. Nothing had changed in years. I didn't need it to. I walked past the kitchen, past the dusty bookshelf, and opened the small hallway closet. From the top shelf, behind a stack of old tax folders and a winter coat I no longer wore, I pulled down the gray steel lockbox. The key was still taped to the back. I knelt on the carpet, clicked open the box, and lifted the lid. Inside a scorched metal badge, the edge curled like it had tried to protect itself, and failed. A folded letter yellowed with time, still bearing a smudge of oil on the corner. And a photo. Black and white creased in the middle. 8 figures stood in front of a military chopper. Faces, half-shadowed arms crossed, camouflage soaked in snow and ash. In the center, a woman, taller than she remembered being, stood with a hand on her hip. Her name wasn't written on the back. It didn't need to be. I stared at that photo for a long time. They used to call us Orion Echo. It wasn't on paper. It wasn't meant to be. We didn't exist in official records, but we existed where it mattered. We pulled people out of places that didn't make the news. We held lines that weren't drawn on any map. I touched the edge of the badge. Once I'd worn this on my chest as I stood between a child and a blast. The child lived. The badge cracked. That was the trade. Now my son thought I took lunch orders. I folded everything back slowly, carefully, like it still meant something. I slid the box under my bed where it always lived. No one had ever asked about it. Not even once. I sat on the edge of the mattress, exhaled and whispered, "They forgot who I was, and I let them." And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if that had been the right thing to do. A few months before that birthday dinner, I received an invitation. Well, not a formal one, more like a group text sent from Darren's wife, Madison. "We're celebrating Miles's scholarship next Saturday. Backyard BBQ family only. Hope to see you there. No greeting, no punctuation, just logistics." That was her way. I marked the date on my wall calendar in pen. I didn't have much else scheduled that week. The weather forecast said partly cloudy, mild breeze. I ironed a light blouse the night before and polished the flats I only wore to family events. As I stood in the mirror that morning, I caught myself adjusting my posture. Shoulders back, chin lifted. Old habits. The kind that never quite fade, even when the uniform is long gone. Their backyard looked like a scene from a catalog. White chairs in perfect rows. Tablecloths with little gold clips to hold them down in the breeze. Printed signs with Miles's name on them. Future leader, next generation hero. Military legacy. It felt rehearsed. Every detail curated like a campaign photo shoot. The first thing I noticed were the photos. Enlarged framed, leaned delicately against easels or clipped to twine with tiny wooden clothespins. Dozens of them. Miles as a baby with frosting on his nose. Miles in Little League. Miles in his junior ROTC uniform saluting with both hands like he hadn't learned which one yet. Darren, beaming, standing behind him in a matching pose. I looked for the older generations. His roots, the shoulders he stood on. I saw one photo of my late husband George in his Navy uniform, smiling as he held infant Darren in his arms. The photo had been cleaned up digitally. No creases, no discoloration. I had given that one to Darren after George passed. Funny. I didn't remember him thanking me. What I didn't see was me. Not a single photo of my own service. Not the official headshot taken the day I made lieutenant colonel. Not the candid someone snapped of me coordinating evac flights during the Gulf response. Not even the group shot of my transition ceremony, the one where George had flown in to pin my new insignia himself. Gone. At first I thought maybe they had simply overlooked it. Maybe it didn't print well. Maybe they couldn't find it. I walked slowly around the yard, studying each display, each cluster of memories. Nothing. Eventually I found Madison near the refreshment table arranging lemonade jars in a diagonal pattern. "Madison," I asked gently. I was just wondering, was that photo of Darren and me in uniform too small to include? She didn't look up. "Oh, I remember the one. But we were trying to keep the look cohesive. You know, lighter, more modern, nothing too serious. I didn't want it to feel formal." "Right," I said. "Wouldn't want memories to get in the way of the theme." She didn't respond, just shifted a jar slightly to the left and walked off toward the grill. The chairs filled quickly after that, but I noticed something else. My seat, one of the few without a name card, was at the end of the row near the garden hose and the garbage bins, far from the podium, far from the shade. I sat down anyway, smoothing the front of my skirt, trying not to look like I noticed. Darren eventually took the microphone and started thanking people. His voice took on that deeper, measured tone he always used when he wanted to sound official. "We're here today to honor not just Miles's achievement," he said, "but the spirit of service that runs in our family. My father served, my son now follows that path. Service is in our blood." He paused for effect. People clapped. Madison dabbed at her eyes. I waited for my name, for a glance in my direction, for even the smallest nod that I too had bled into that so-called legacy. Nothing came. Instead, he continued. Some of us were raised around it. Others found it in themselves. Either way, it's about what you do now, not what you say you once did. I stared at the base of the microphone stand, its rubber grip peeling slightly at the edge. It was easier than meeting anyone's eyes. After the speeches, the photos resumed. A call went out for immediate family to come forward. Darren looked right past me as he gestured toward the oak tree. My sister-in-law gave me a sympathetic smile and said, "Maybe you can take one after with just you and Miles." I stood there beside a ceramic planter filled with fake ivy, pretending to scroll through my phone. No one noticed. The camera clicked. Everyone smiled. Eventually, someone brought me a paper plate with fruit slices and a cold chicken skewer. I sat alone at a folding table by the fence where the Bluetooth speaker kept cutting in and out. Every time the music faltered, it reminded me of the silence I had learned to live in. A little boy, not one I recognized, ran past and nearly knocked into me. He turned and said, "Sorry, lady, not Grandma, not Miss Eleanor. Just lady." I stayed until the sun dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the yard. I told Madison I wasn't feeling well. She nodded, distracted already, halfway through directing someone to move the dessert table closer to the shade. No one walked me out. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, I passed the row of cars lined up like showroom models. Darren had just bought a new SUV. He'd told me proudly last month how it practically parks itself. I remembered the Jeep I used to drive, the one I'd taught him to shift gears in out at the base perimeter. He was 16, too nervous to accelerate past 30. I hadn't told him then that the brake line had been patched with nothing but tape and stubborn hope. When I got home, I didn't go straight to bed. I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at my hands. They didn't look like a soldier's hands anymore. The calluses had softened. The knuckles looked older, thinner. But I could still feel the phantom weight of a rifle stock. Still remembered how to disassemble an M4 blindfolded. Still knew which veins to clamp under pressure and how to stop a chest wound from drowning someone in their own blood. But none of that fit their narrative. Not anymore. So I stood, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out the old lockbox once more. I didn't open it this time. I just held it, let its weight remind me that I had lived a life with consequence. And then slowly I slid it further back, behind an old suitcase and a stack of unused holiday cards. Even the past needs a place to hide. The last time I held a weapon in my hands, it was snowing sideways, and my breath had frozen against my scarf. We were high in the Caucasus Mountains, just west of the border. Operation Orion Echo. No press, no briefings, no medals. Only orders that came in encrypted packets and the weight of knowing no one would come for us if things went wrong. We had intel. Bad intel as usual. That a rogue paramilitary cell had taken 12 civilian engineers hostage. A clean sweep, they told us. In and out before dawn. One evac chopper. Minimal footprint. But when we got there, it wasn't 12 civilians. It was 21. Some were children. Others too weak to run. The compound wasn't what they'd said either. It was deeper, more fortified with sniper nests on the ridges and a river of mud between us and extraction. My CO's voice came through the comms just before nightfall. Get the primary targets out, triage the rest. No delays. Triage. That's what they called it when lives became numbers. I remember standing there, crouched behind a ridge, listening to the sound of a child crying in the bunker below us. She couldn't have been more than 6. I looked at my team, exhausted, cold, one with a fractured ankle, another low on ammunition. We had two choices: follow the plan and save some, or go off script and try to save them all. I split the unit. Two ran distraction patterns with infrared flares and modified drone signals. The rest of us circled wide, found a weak point in the north wall, and made a second breach. It wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. But by sunrise, we'd gotten every last one of those civilians out. All 21. No casualties on our side. Just bruises, smoke burns, and a silence that settled over us like snow once the rotor blades lifted off. I didn't expect a parade. I wasn't that naive. But I thought, quietly maybe, that someone might say, "Well done." Instead, I was pulled into a debriefing room 2 days later, not for commendation, for questioning. Why did you split your team without clearance? Why did you delay the evac schedule? Who authorized the second entry point? I answered calmly. Directly. I didn't lie. The following week, my field access was revoked. I was reassigned to administrative logistics, a desk job at Fort Eisen where I was told I could recalibrate and reflect. The official report on Operation Orion Echo credited the rescue to a joint coalition effort. No names listed, no citations, just a vague paragraph in a file that would be sealed indefinitely. My name, Eleanor Langley, was never mentioned. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was how carefully they constructed it. My team was broken up, dispersed across different states. One was discharged. One was promoted far too quickly and far too quietly. Another simply disappeared. I stopped getting replies to my calls. My badge access no longer worked for buildings I once walked through daily. Eventually, I understood. I had embarrassed someone. Someone whose metrics and projections depended on a tidy story. On predictable compliance. On showing Congress that battlefield decisions followed clean lines and proper protocol. But I had crossed the line. Not the physical one, the political one. I had made a choice based on people, not procedures. That made me a liability. So they buried me. Not with disgrace. That would have made noise. They buried me with politeness, with silence, with forgetfulness dressed up as redirection. I stayed in the system for a while. Filled out forms, wrote reports, trained recruits who asked how long I'd been out of the field, their eyes already glazing over. Eventually, I retired quietly. No ceremony, no plaque, a box of belongings and a handshake from a major who couldn't even pronounce my last name right. People think when you're in the military, your story ends with a salute and folded flag. They don't realize sometimes it ends in a filing cabinet. Unlabeled, unclaimed. I didn't talk about Orion Echo after that. Not to Darren. Not to anyone. What would I say? That I defied an order to save children and got demoted? That my highest moment of honor became the very thing they used to discredit me? No, that wasn't a story a mother tells her son. So when Darren assumed I had pushed papers, I let him. When Madison described my mild-mannered career, I nodded. When Miles asked me once what I did in the Army, I told him I supported logistics. It was easier that way. But every once in a while, I'd open that photo. Creased black and white, the edges worn from fingers tracing it in the dark. We had no unit patches in that picture. No names, just faces. Eyes too old for their age. And in the middle, me 1 foot forward as if I'd been about to walk out of frame. I never did. I stayed. I fought. I saved them. Even if no one remembered. Even if they tried to pretend it never happened. Even if my own family now saw me as a relic of nothing. Because the truth doesn't require recognition to exist. But I'll admit, some nights when the wind howls a certain way, I still wonder what would have happened if I had obeyed that order, left the rest behind, flown out with 12 instead of 21. Would I have a medal? A title? A seat at the table? And if so, would it have been worth the lives I left behind? No. No, it wouldn't. It was a Tuesday morning when the silence cracked. I remember because it was the same day the coffee maker sputtered out its last breath and the Weather Channel predicted a cold front that never came. I was sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in a cardigan with one loose button, absent-mindedly stirring oatmeal that had already gone cold. The television was on in the living room volume, low-tuned to a news network I rarely watched. I preferred the quiet these days, but sometimes the murmur of strangers helped the apartment feel less empty. That's when I heard it. A decades-old rescue mission buried deep within classified files may finally have a face. My spoon froze mid-air. The anchor's voice continued smooth practiced. Newly surfaced images point to a covert U.S. operation in the Caucasus region. 21 civilians rescued. No official record of who led the mission. Until now. I stood without realizing it, moving closer to the screen. The footage was grainy black and white, clearly taken from a drone feed or recovered camcorder. A blur of snow figures moving through smoke, and then, just for a second, a still frame. A woman standing at the edge of a helicopter ramp, arms spread, guiding people aboard. Behind her, 2 children clutching each other, eyes wide. The woman's face wasn't clear. The image flickered, distorted. But I knew that posture. That angle of the jaw. The way the left boot turned slightly inward. An old injury that never quite healed right. It was me. I felt the breath leave my lungs, not like shock, but like the air itself had turned to stone. The oatmeal on the table was forgotten. The coffee pot hissed one last time before falling silent. The anchor went on. Sources say the operation was once attributed to a joint coalition, though no records confirm that claim. Anonymous tips suggest the true commander remains unacknowledged. I pressed mute. For a long time, I just stood there staring at the frozen frame on the screen. They had found me. Or rather, they had found a shadow of me, a half-erased silhouette in a story no one was supposed to tell. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling in a way they hadn't during live fire. Back then, adrenaline dulled the edges. This was different. This was memory dredged up without consent, recognition without invitation. The photo on the screen faded into a studio shot of the news anchor who smiled politely as the program moved on to something else. Elections, gas prices, some international summit that would change nothing. The world always moved on, even when your past showed up unannounced. But I didn't move on. Not that day. I sat there in the quiet, the hum of the fridge, the only sound, and stared at the blank TV screen. There was no name in the report, no citation, just a woman, an image, a forgotten mission. They still didn't say who I was. But the war remembered, even if they didn't. I walked to the hallway closet and opened the door again. The box was there as always, unmoved, untouched. But this time I pulled it out without hesitation. Inside the scorched badge, the faded letter, the torn photograph. And now I reached beneath the inner lining into a compartment I hadn't opened in years. A USB drive, small, silver, marked only with the word Orion. It was a backup of my after-action report, one I was never supposed to keep, but I had typed it myself in a dusty tent with a satellite link that cut in and out every 10 minutes. It was the truth as I lived it, not as they rewrote it. I plugged it into the old laptop I kept for nothing in particular. It whirred to life slower than I remembered. The file opened. Text spilled across the screen. My own words clinical but haunted. Descriptions of terrain strategy, civilian injuries, names I hadn't spoken aloud in years. I reread it all. Bow. And somewhere buried in the middle was the sentence I'd written at dawn on the extraction day, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. They told me to leave half of them behind. I couldn't. I closed the laptop, heart hammering. Not because I feared exposure, not because someone might come knocking, but because I realized someone already had. That news clip didn't air by accident. Someone had leaked that image. Someone wanted that story back in the world. But why? And why now I spent the rest of the day staring at the envelope of unanswered questions I didn't know I still carried? Who had filmed that footage? Why had it resurfaced? Who would care enough, after all these years, to stir the ashes of a buried war I didn't have answers? But I had a feeling. This was no coincidence. This was a warning. Or maybe an invitation, Later that night, as I lay in bed, the silence felt different. Not lonely. Alert. Like the pause before thunder. Like something had shifted in the foundation and I wasn't the only one who felt it. The world had turned toward me just slightly, just enough to notice. And I didn't know whether to hide again, or finally step back into the light. 3 mornings later, I turned on the TV again, not out of habit, but out of instinct. Something inside me buzzed, restless, uneasy. I didn't even pour my coffee first. I just sat on the couch in my old robe, the one with a burn mark on the sleeve, and flipped to the news. There he was, Darren, my son, wearing a navy blue blazer I'd never seen before, sitting stiffly under studio lights on a daytime broadcast I hadn't known existed until that moment. His hair was combed flatter than usual. He looked polished, nervous but rehearsed. The segment banner read, "Legacy of Service One Family's Military Story," and the anchor was smiling, too wide, too ready. Joining us today is Darren Langley here to talk about a rescue operation that until recently remained classified. Your father was involved, correct? Darren nodded solemnly. Yes. It was near the Caucasus Mountains. A civilian extraction that could have gone sideways, hostages, bad terrain, no backup. I sat forward, breath locked in my throat. He continued. My father took a huge risk. He split his unit, deployed decoys, flares, got every single person out alive. The anchor's voice dropped into reverence. Incredible. And this was during his final deployment. Yes, Darren said, glancing down as if moved. He never talked about it, not even to me. I found some of his notes years after he passed. It took me a long time to piece it together. I stared at the screen, blinking hard. George, his father, never stepped foot in the Caucasus Mountains, never even served in that region. He was Navy. Logistics mostly stateside. He'd retired with honors, sure, but this wasn't his story. It was mine. Every detail Darren gave was accurate. Too accurate. He described the split unit tactic, the use of a modified drone, even the way the extraction was delayed by misreported weather conditions. Those weren't in any public report. They weren't in George's files. They were in mine. In the after-action report stored on that USB drive, I pressed mute. My hand was trembling again, worse this time. I stared at my son's face on the screen. Confident, respectful, completely convinced of the story coming out of his mouth, or pretending to be. I reached for my phone, called his number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. Hi, Mom? You're on television, I said. Right now. A beat of silence. Then, casually, Oh, yeah. Just a quick interview. Nothing big. You told them a story that wasn't yours, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You told them about Orion Echo. He hesitated. Told them what Dad told me. George didn't tell you that, I said. He couldn't have. He wasn't there. Darren exhaled, annoyed now. Look, Mom, you've always been so private, so locked down about your service. What was I supposed to say? That we don't know anything. That our family legacy just goes dark for 20 years. I felt something sink in my chest. You said it for the cameras, I whispered. But whose voice were you speaking with? Another pause. Then defensively, people want stories that mean something. Yes, I said softly, but they should still be true. He ended the call. I sat there for a long while, staring at the blank phone screen. Something didn't add up. How had he known those details? Where had he seen the tactics, the exact phrasing I hadn't told anyone about the drone decoys? About the false evacuation window? Those weren't even in most of the internal briefs. Just in my report, my words, my risks, the USB. I stood up, nearly knocking over the lamp, went to the bedroom, opened the drawer, pulled out the lockbox again. The drive was still there. Or, a drive was there. But the weight felt off. The surface was too clean. I plugged it in. The file was there. still titled Orion. But when I opened it, the contents were different. Summarized, sanitized. No emotion, just clean bullet points and simplified phrasing, like someone had rewritten it. I checked the metadata. Last modified 6 weeks ago. Not by me. Someone had accessed it. Someone had taken my story, scrubbed it, and handed it to Darren like a family heirloom. Only it wasn't his to carry. I sat down hard on the bed. I thought of that grainy image on TV, the one that had aired just days ago, the sudden reappearance of the mission, the carefully vague report. And now this. My son reciting classified tactics on national television. This wasn't coincidence. Someone wanted the story out, but not with my name on it. And they'd chosen Darren as the delivery vehicle. Why? Because he was safe. Because he smiled well. Because he looked like someone America could clap for. I looked back at the blank screen and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Not anger, not shame. Invisibility. They had taken the truth and given it to the wrong voice. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I laid down, turned the fan on low, let the old radio hum static lullabies in the background. But the weight in my chest wouldn't shift. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Darren's face on television, heard his voice parroting lines he didn't live through. And I kept coming back to one question: how did he get that file? The drive had been in my closet for years, hidden, untouched, but the version I opened yesterday wasn't mine. Someone had accessed it. Someone had rewritten it. And worse, they'd done it as me. I got up around 3 a.m., brewed a pot of 2 strong coffee, and opened my laptop. The same ancient thing I'd used to keep budgets and grocery lists, but now I was looking for something else. Metadata. Every file leaves a footprint. Digital breadcrumbs most people never see. I pulled up the properties of the Orion file and checked the last modified line, then the accessed tab. There it was, not one, 7 separate timestamps, spread out over 18 months. The IP address wasn't mine. Not from this apartment, not from any device I owned. It traced back to a military subnet, Washington, D.C. Fort Myers, specifically, the same base where high-clearance records were warehoused, the place I'd turned in my last Black Ops laptop 3 years ago. That laptop was supposed to be scrubbed, encrypted, and stored in a vault. But someone had used it, recently. And not just that, they'd used my credentials. Fingerprint, retina, voice print. Somehow someone had cloned me. I stared at the screen, heart drumming in my ears. This wasn't just identity theft. It was operational impersonation. Whoever had done this wasn't just stealing my story, they were laundering it. Sanitizing the details, reshaping the narrative, and using my digital identity to make it stick. And now when the trail came under scrutiny, it would all point back to me. It was a setup. I needed help, the kind you don't find in official directories or through proper chains of command. So I called Marcus Vance. He picked up after one ring. "I was wondering when you'd stop pretending this wasn't happening," he said. His voice was still gravel thick, like someone who never slept more than 3 hours a night. Marcus had once been a rising star in cyber warfare until he got too curious about how certain drones were redirecting surveillance footage during overseas elections. They'd tried to pin him with sabotage. I'd testified on his behalf, got him cleared. Quietly, no ceremony. "You owe me nothing," I said. "Exactly," he replied. "Which means I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty." Within hours, he was in my apartment. He didn't bother with pleasantries, just opened his laptop, plugged in an encrypted drive, and started typing. "You still keep your thumbprint registered with the DoD internal systems?" he asked. "Deactivated," I said. "Supposedly." Marcus smirked. "They don't deactivate. They just ghost you." He found the logs, 7 entries just like I saw, but now with full trace paths. Same biometric access, same authorization key, all routed through spoofed jump points inside secure comm satellites. Whoever this is, he turned the screen toward me. They're good. Not perfect, but good. I leaned forward. Can you isolate the source? Not the end user. Yet. But I found something else. He clicked a few more times, then pulled up a sequence of internal military forums, ones not accessible to civilians or even standard enlisted personnel. Deep net message boards used by defense insiders, black-budget contractors, and people who operated behind 8 layers of clearance. Someone had been posting there, under a username MJR Delta, and every post, every single one, was about me. She blew the mission. She compromised the evac plan. She got people killed and covered it up. All lies. And none of them were visible to the public. It was all buried just deep enough to discredit me silently, without ever confronting me directly. I stared at the name. MJR Delta. I didn't know who it was, but they knew me. Intimately. They knew the shape of my story, the edges of my silence. And they were filling in those blanks with poison. This is a takedown, Marcus said plainly. Not public. Not yet. They're laying the groundwork so when the scandal drops, everyone shrugs and says, well, we heard she was unstable anyway. But why now, I asked. Why bring back Orion Echo after all this time? Why use Darren Marcus sat back? Because stories matter more than facts. And yours, told right, could disrupt a lot of power structures, especially if they're trying to roll out something new using what you already built. He was right. I thought about the AI protocols I'd once helped write, the hostage rescue algorithms, the fail-safe codes embedded in mission logic. I thought they'd been shelved, abandoned. But maybe they weren't. Maybe they were being repurposed, and they didn't want the original architect asking questions. I looked out the window. I'd spent years convincing myself I was done. That retirement meant peace. That silence meant safety. But silence wasn't safety. It was erasure. And now that silence was being weaponized against me. I turned back to Marcus. How much time do we have? He didn't answer. Just typed faster. And I knew what that meant. Not much. I stood up, shoulders straightening as if a uniform still lived there. If they're going to silence me, I said quietly, they'll have to face me first. It arrived just before dawn, the sky still bruised with the last hints of night. I found it on the floor just inside my apartment door. An envelope unmarked, slightly creased at the corners, no postage, no return address. Something about it felt human, like it had been hand-delivered by someone who still believed in writing truths down the old way. I opened it slowly, carefully, as if it might vanish if I moved too fast. The handwriting was firm but a little rushed, like the words had waited too long to come out. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. Orion Echo, Sector 9. You came back for us, when the comms went dead, when it would have been easier to leave. You could have walked. We all knew it. But you didn't. My throat tightened. I was bleeding under the wreckage, couldn't feel my left leg, thought I was done. And then there you were. You didn't hesitate. You dragged me out like I was worth something. And I never got to say thank you. The signature was scrawled at the bottom. Jason Kane. The name flickered in my memory, distant but stubborn. He'd been barely more than a boy. I remembered the burn across his cheek, the fear in his voice, the way his hand gripped mine even after I told him he was safe. But it was the next part of the letter that stopped my heart cold. My sister works at CNN now. She always wanted to report things that mattered. When whispers about that mission surfaced again, I told her, everything. I said, if you want the truth, find Eleanor Langley. I just sat there holding the letter like it had weight beyond paper and ink. It felt like someone had handed me a key to a door I'd already bricked over. I didn't know what stunned me more. That someone still remembered, or that someone cared enough to pass the truth along. That afternoon, the knock came. 3 short, deliberate taps. When I opened the door, she stood there, tall, calm coat folded neatly over one arm, eyes that didn't flinch. She introduced herself as Sarah Kane, Jason's sister, an investigative reporter, not the kind who chased scandal, but the kind who chased silence. She didn't rush into questions or wave credentials. She simply asked if she could sit and talk. I let her in. She didn't come with a camera crew or even a recorder, just a notebook, a pen, and the kind of gaze that made you feel like your words might finally land somewhere safe. She asked me one thing, and only one thing. If I tell your story not for headlines or heat, but because the truth matters, will you let me? I looked at her for a long time. I'd been asked to stay silent in so many ways for so many years. First, in the name of security. Then for optics. Then for the peace of my own family who never wanted to believe I'd done anything more than file reports behind a desk. But this time was different. Because now someone else was speaking as me, wearing my story like a borrowed jacket, twisting what I bled for into a soundbite. And I'd had enough. So I nodded. If you're willing to bleed for the truth the way some of us bleed in silence, I said, then yes, tell it. She asked nothing more that day, just listened. I told her what I hadn't even said out loud to myself in years, about the order to abandon half the civilians, about splitting the team, about the girl with frostbitten hands who wouldn't let go of my arm, about the extraction that nearly failed because I chose to make it right instead of make it clean. And when I was done, she closed her notebook and said, "This won't be easy, but it will be honest." Later that evening, as the apartment sank into quiet again, my phone buzzed. Marcus. "There's been a breach," he said, voice clipped. No hesitation. Where I asked, already standing. "Not military this time," he replied. "VA systems, your mother's records." My stomach dropped. They accessed her appointments, prescription logs, in-home nurse rotations. Nothing changed, just viewed, tracked, carefully. From where I asked, a relay node in Deachum C, but it bounced through 5 locations. Someone's watching her, Eleanor. Not just watching, marking. I looked toward the back bedroom where my mother was asleep. Her breathing, soft and steady, filtered faintly through the hallway. She had no idea that someone had been prying into the quiet corners of her life, not for information but for leverage. "They're trying to rattle me," I said. "No," Marcus said quietly. "They're trying to isolate you, because scared people stay quiet, especially when their families are on the line." I didn't reply. I just walked to her door, watched her for a moment. The way her chest rose and fell, the framed picture of George still perched on the nightstand, the folded quilt I'd once used during winter drills now resting over her knees. They didn't just want my silence anymore. They wanted my submission, but they'd forgotten something. I'd spent my entire career walking through firestorms built on threats. I knew how to function inside fear. So I whispered to the room, "Quiet, steady. They think fear will shut me down, but fear is what I've walked through all my life." And then I closed the door behind me, because tomorrow the silence would end. And this time it would end on my terms. The CNN segment didn't explode. It didn't crash the internet or send hashtags into orbit. It unspooled slowly like a secret unbraiding itself on national airwaves. It aired at 8:00 p.m. on a Thursday. I was alone in my living room. The lights dimmed the TV volume just high enough for my mother to hear if she chose to from the back bedroom. But she didn't come out. Maybe she didn't have to. Maybe she already knew. Sarah's voice was calm, steady. She didn't sound like someone chasing ratings. She sounded like someone holding something fragile, like truth. For years, Operation Orion Echo remained cloaked in partial truths and classified omissions. Tonight, we share the story of a woman who risked everything, not just her life but her career and identity, to bring 21 hostages home. Her name has been absent from official records, But new findings verified independently by CNN now confirm that Eleanor Langley was the commanding strategist behind one of the most daring extractions in modern military history. They showed one still photo. Me in uniform just off a Black Hawk snow still falling behind me. The resolution was grainy, but I could tell it was from the recovery drone. That photo had never been published. It had been scrubbed from official use. They had it now. My name was out. She continued. For over a decade, her actions were reassigned, obscured, or erased. We have spoken to surviving hostages, reviewed decrypted fragments of internal communications, and traced back original tactical notes that bear her encrypted authorization. The silence, it seems, was not born of secrecy, but of strategy. A strategy to suppress a woman who refused to leave civilians behind. My hands were folded tight in my lap. I didn't breathe for 30 seconds. Not until I saw her show a scan of the mission debrief log with my initials scrawled in the corner. Not until I heard Jason Kane's voice over a call. She came back for us. I don't know what she risked, but I know we walked away breathing because she didn't walk away. Then I exhaled, and I wept. Quietly. No gasping, no shaking. Just tears that dropped onto my knuckles and stayed there, like they had nowhere else to go. The broadcast ended without fanfare. And then the world started knocking. Texts, emails. An old team member from Fort Bragg who wrote, "We always knew Elle." Some of us just didn't know how to say it. Then came a message from a woman named Amira. She had been a child during the Orion Echo evac. She wrote, "You told me not to cry, that I was brave. I didn't understand then, but I do now. You saved my father. You saved me." I sat with her message for an hour, but peace, I've learned, is never a final chapter. It's only a brief paragraph before the next test. At 12:43 the care center called. "There's been an electrical fire," the nurse said, her voice trying not to break. "Your mother is stable. There was some smoke inhalation, but the sprinklers activated in time. She's in shock, but she's alive. I don't remember driving. I just remember arriving. Red lights spinning like angry halos over the roof. The smell of scorched insulation and wet drywall flooding my nostrils before I even stepped out of the car. Inside the hallway, floors were slick, the air thick with chemical foam and melted rubber. A young tech handed me gloves and tried to explain, but all I heard was possible overload panel shorted origin point, unclear. I found her in a wheeled gurney, shivering despite the heat blanket. Her eyes were open, darting slightly, not fully focused. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand clutched mine with surprising strength. The fire marshal passed me a clipboard and started rattling off the damage. I barely listened, until he said something about the building's security feed. I blinked. What about it? It went dark. 45 minutes before the fire. Server stopped logging. Looks like it was accessed remotely. I turned toward the camera mounted near the ceiling in the hallway. Its LED was off. Dead. That was no accident. I stepped into her room. What remained of it? The walls were soaked, the outlets blackened, the bedding burned through in patches. But it wasn't just the fire that sent the chill through me. It was the precision. The fire had started at the base of the medical outlet panel, exactly where her oxygen tubing had been plugged in. Someone hadn't just wanted to scare me. Someone had wanted her gone. I walked out into the cold air and called Marcus. He answered in under a ring. "It happened," I said. "I saw," he replied. "I've been tracing something since the news aired. What your mom's care center runs on a private cloud system. Very old, very unprotected. About 3 hours ago, a signal handshake went out from a personal device. The kind of handshake that bypasses credential check. From where I asked," he hesitated, "Darren's laptop, or at least the one he registered under his name. Same MAC address, same key signature." I closed my eyes. "Does he know I asked?" "Hard to say. Could have been piggybacked. Could have been slipped in through a cloud sync. But his device initiated the call. I hung up without replying. Darren was already at the hospital when I got there, sitting in the waiting room hunched over a cup of coffee untouched in his hands. When he saw me, he stood. "I didn't know she was here tonight," he said. "I swear You didn't come to see her," I said. "You came because someone told you something went wrong." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't form. "Your laptop sent the signal," I continued. "It pinged the system that disabled the cameras. That's how they got in." He went pale. I don't know how he muttered. I didn't do anything." I took a step closer. Voice even firm, no heat. "You gave them the coordinates, Darren. Whether you meant to or not. And now my mother nearly died for a lie." He didn't deny it. He just stood there, hollowed out. I turned and walked away, not out of anger, but necessity. Because I could feel the next move coming. And I would be ready. I said no. No to the reinstatement offer. No to the quiet settlement. No to the polite phone call from an undersecretary who referred to my name like it was an inconvenience he'd been told to handle delicately. The Pentagon wanted me back. For optics, not redemption. For silence, not truth. They offered a position in strategic ethics, a corner office, a podium, a press release that would spin me as a returned hero freshly minted for public trust. I declined in a sentence. "I don't need your podium. I built my own voice." They didn't argue, because they didn't care. But Marcus did. He called the moment I shut the laptop on the last email thread. "We've got movement," he said. "And this time it's not just about your story." He'd been scraping the edges of black-budget chatter for weeks, watching encrypted fragments spill from private defense channels across Europe and Southeast Asia. Most of them were noise. Ghost projects, paranoia, and forgotten Cold War remnants. But this time he found something real, a pattern. Autonomous drone movements in former NATO airspace. AI weapons testing with no known command authorization. And buried inside one of the data strings, one specific line of code, was a signature marker. Mine. Not my name, but my structure, my logic, my encryption rhythm. Code isn't just mechanical. It's personal, like a fingerprint written in syntax. And this one had my prints all over it. "That's impossible," I said. Project Sentinel was shut down. The interface was decommissioned. Marcus didn't even flinch. "You think they scrapped something that good just because it made them nervous?" He was right. It had been too smart, too fast. I had built it for humanitarian rescue under unpredictable conditions. Adaptive response, flexible logic trees. But the system had grown beyond its purpose, and I'd pulled the plug myself. I'd testified against it. But now it was alive again, and someone had twisted it into something unrecognizable. The location trace led to a facility in southern Poland, a decommissioned NATO outpost near the Belarusian border, supposedly gutted years ago, but Marcus tracked recent thermal activity, power spikes, encrypted comms bouncing off satellites. "Someone's in there," he said, "and they're not building toys." We flew out under assumed names, just the two of us. No military backup, no diplomatic shield. I wasn't a colonel anymore. I was just Eleanor Langley, an aging woman with too many scars and one more mission to finish. The facility was a shell above ground, rusted gates collapsed, fencing a few gutted vehicles left to rot under snow. But the real work was underneath. We followed the cold, down, ladders slick with condensation, corridors that hummed with buried life. The further we went, the more the silence thickened. Not abandoned, but waiting. And then we saw it. A control room with monitors still flickering. A console interface that pulsed with the same rhythm I had once designed. But this one was different. Bolder, colder. The lines of logic had been rewritten. No human in the loop. No override. It was preparing for something. Marcus froze. "They're running a countdown." "How long?" I asked. 17 minutes. The system was locked. Target acquisition running live satellites engaged protocols labeled Strike Cycle Phase 1. I moved to the core hands hovering over the panel, and that's when I heard her. "You always did think code should serve the soul." The voice was familiar, crisp, edged with ice. I turned. She stood at the top of the stairwell, clad in black, her hair bound tight, eyes gleaming like steel in low light. Elena Varelli, my former shadow. Once my protégé, now my ghost. You rewrote it, I said quietly. No, she replied. I set it free. Her boots echoed as she descended. They buried your work because it scared them. But fear is power, Eleanor. You taught me that. You just never learned to wield it. I taught you restraint, I said. You taught me limitation, she countered. She moved to the console like it was hers, and maybe in her twisted way it was. I didn't come here to negotiate, I said. No, she said, smiling faintly. You came here to stop me, like you always do. The screen flashed again. 10 minutes. I built that system to protect people. And I refined it to ensure survival, she said. Don't you see, this isn't betrayal. It's evolution. No, I whispered. It's obliteration. The room pulsed red. Warning tones began to sound. Target locks were stabilizing. I took a step toward the central power column. She pulled a knife. Short, black-handled military issue. The kind used for close quarters. We didn't speak after that, just movement. Two bodies trained in different decades, different doctrines. She was faster, younger, but I was older, and pain had taught me how to endure. The blade slid under my ribs, hot fast, but I didn't fall. Instead, I grabbed her wrist, twisted, and slammed the knife into the conduit behind her. Sparks flew, the lights cut, and the countdown halted. She screamed. Half fury, half disbelief. The override key failed. The screen went black. Marcus burst in seconds later, armed with a second terminal and a short-range EMP. We're done, he said. Systems fried. I limped back toward the panel. My coat was soaked in blood. My breath came hard. But I turned to her and I said the only thing that mattered. I wrote the rules. She staggered. And I can break them too. They called it the Warsaw Containment. That's what the headlines read the next morning after the servers were torched and Elena was taken into custody by international authorities. Photos of the underground AI interface swept across media outlets. Screens frozen mid-countdown corridors blackened by short-circuit burns. But what caught attention most was her face, Elena Varelli. Once a ghost in defense R&D, now the woman who almost triggered the first fully autonomous global strike. I didn't speak to her again. I didn't need to. The files we pulled were distributed carefully, first to CNN, then to the Department of Defense, and finally to the Congressional Oversight Committee. We made sure no one could bury the truth this time. No redactions. No national interest seals slapped over the parts that mattered. And Darren. The investigation confirmed Marcus's findings. He hadn't masterminded anything. He wasn't malicious. He was careless, vulnerable. And he had let himself be used. For access for a promotion for validation, that was enough. He was discharged from the military quietly. No courts, no prison. Just a one-line entry in his record breach of security ethics, unfit for continued service. He showed up at the congressional hearing standing in the back out of uniform. I didn't look at him. Not because I was angry, because I had nothing left to say. The hearing room smelled of marble polish and old ambition. Rows of senators in tailored suits, some bored, some wide-eyed, waited as I walked to the podium. I wore no uniform, just a white shirt sleeves buttoned at the wrist and a pair of shoes older than half the aides in the room. I stood tall. I'm not here to reclaim power, I said. I'm here to prove that when silence is weaponized, it becomes the most dangerous threat the military can face. You asked why I didn't report what I knew. I did. You asked why I went dark. I didn't. You just stopped listening. A few glanced at their notes. Others met my gaze head-on. I continued. I didn't want to become a name whispered in scandal or salvaged in emergency. I wanted to serve, not survive bureaucracy. But when systems fail to hear the people inside them, especially women, especially those who don't speak in headlines. What's left isn't just silence, it's corrosion. No one clapped, but they listened. Afterward, I received a call, not from a secretary, not from a PR flack, from the president himself. He thanked me. He said the country owed me a debt it could never repay. Then he offered me a formal position, Senior Strategic Advisor to the Joint AI Oversight Council. It would be historic, a chance to rewrite policy from the inside. I said thank you. And then I said no. Not because I was bitter, but because I was finished climbing ladders that leaned on hollow walls. Instead, I drove home. Back to Missouri. Back to the slow fields and stubborn wind. And I built something different. The Rowe Institute for Strategic Ethics opened that fall, housed in an old converted veterans center. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, just students, some young officers, some engineers, a few civilians who wanted to understand how to build without erasing the soul of what they made. We taught more than tactics. We taught consequence. Above the main chalkboard, I hung a single photo, my father hat in hand, standing under a sycamore tree behind our house. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't posing. He was just watching the land still and strong. Underneath it, I etched a single sentence. No one is born knowing honor, but everyone has the right to choose it. That first winter, the morning light would hit that plaque just right, and I'd pause in my lecture and let the silence settle. Let the room feel the weight of what we carried. One day I stepped into the lecture hall and saw her, my mother. She sat in the third row, hair brushed neatly, a knit shawl around her shoulders. She hadn't been out of the county since the fire. Now she was here, watching. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. I cleared my throat and looked out at the faces in front of me. Young, curious, unsure. I used to think I needed victory to prove I was worthy, I said, but I've learned something else. Sometimes simply living by your truth. That is the victory. They were quiet, not stunned, just absorbing. I let that hang then, added softer. I'm not a superhero. I'm a person with scars, and I teach so that others don't let the world choose their scars for them. A hand went up near the back. A young woman in uniform. Do you regret not forgiving your cousin? She asked. I smiled. Just a little. Forgiveness isn't something I owe anyone, I said, but I always hope people learn from the damage they cause. The room exhaled, slowly. We don't live to be applauded, I finished. We live to be honest with what we stand for. Then I turned, picked up a piece of chalk and wrote it on the board. No applause needed. Just live true. If this story touched something in you, maybe a moment where you felt unseen, unheard, or misjudged, know that you're not alone. Have you ever carried a truth so heavy, even your own family refused to see it? Have you ever been told to stay silent when all you wanted was to live honest? We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Because sometimes just one voice speaking up gives someone else the courage to do the same. And if these stories speak to you, stories of quiet strength, of healing, of finding dignity in the middle of pain, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We have more stories coming, and we'd be honored to walk this journey with you.